Well, it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. I'm going to go ahead and talk while you're eating. I am going to make some general comments, but I always like to leave plenty of time for questions because what is of concern to you is of concern to me. But I don't know what those concerns are starting off. So we'll leave plenty of time for questions. The first thing I want to do is correct some inaccuracies before we get started. Now, the first is this invitation. Many of you have said to me, well, we got your invitation, okay? I did not mail these invitations out. If you were on the list to receive one, it was not because you were on my list of favorite people. By the same token, if you weren't on the list to receive one, it doesn't mean that you were on my list of people I didn't want to see, okay? This came out from somebody else, all right? Now, it says that it's an event with Peter Holt. Well, I think that's probably true. I think that's true. This is an event and I am here, okay? The next inaccuracy I want to correct is that you're not here today for a talk on healthy aging. You are here today to put down a deposit on an apartment here at Bishop Spencer Place. So I'd like to see a show of hands of all of those who intend to put down a deposit today on an apartment here at Bishop Spencer Place. Before you commit yourselves, and the reason I'm starting now while you're eating is because dessert will only be available to those who are intending to put down a deposit here at Bishop Spencer Place on an apartment. All right, we'll hold on the dessert then. The next thing is, it says right here, I am everyone's favorite doctor. Well, I think that's probably true. And so I don't think that is an inaccuracy, but I have tried to point out some that were. It's always fun for me to talk about the subject of healthy aging. But I have to tell you, in my career, which now spans almost 30 years, my whole thought about this has evolved. So if you have heard me talk before about this, some of the things I say may be different because not only am I evolving as I have more experience in my thought about this, but I think our understanding of healthy aging has also evolved over time. The first thing I want to do, though, is define some terms because these are relevant and can be somewhat confusing for people. And that's the difference between lifespan and life expectancy, okay? Life expectancy is, on average, the amount of time that one would be expected to live from birth or from whatever given age they happen to be. So right now in this country, a male born today would have a life expectancy of about 78 years, and a female born today would have a life expectancy of about 80 years, or maybe slightly more than that. Lifespan is the maximum amount of time a given species is believed to be able to survive. And for humans, that appears to be somewhere between 115 and 125. The most credible report of the longest lived human being was a woman in France named Jean Calmette, who lived to be about 122, okay? But it's interesting because I have just seen an article in Nature magazine that is beginning to question this notion that as humans we have a maximum lifespan. So there was a group of demographers in Italy that looked at their population that was 105 years old or older. And they were able to do statistical calculations. And they determined that if you make it to 105, that your likelihood of dying in the next year is a 50-50 proposition. And they surmised from that if it is a 50-50 proposition, it means that potentially you could never die, because with each year, you would still have a 50-50 proposition of surviving. So there is some renewed interest in this notion of the maximum lifespan for humans. But right now, it appears to be somewhere between 115 and 125. But what I find that people are most interested in when it comes to the topic of healthy aging is not how long am I going to live, it's how long am I going to live well. Because most people are interested in a life and a quality of life that allows them to be relatively independent, both cognitively and functionally, able to interact with friends and family, and able to do most things on their own. And so the focus of my comments are going to be directed more at the issue of how we can live well than thinking in terms of how you can eke out every last breath and every last minute and every last day in an effort to live as long as possible. So the concept of healthy aging sits really at the intersection of your genetic predisposition, environmental exposures that you have in your life, and lifestyle choices that you make during your life. So it would be easy for me to give a very brief presentation and say, your healthy aging is solely related to who you have picked as your parents, okay? What you choose to expose yourself to during your life, and what kind of choices you make about the diet that you eat and the exercise that you do and the people that you hang around with, and those kinds of things. But what is interesting is that the contribution that your genetic predisposition makes to your aging and your healthy aging is much greater the older that you are. So what that means is if you were a room full of 30-year-olds, and I think there's a couple here, but if you were a room full of 30-year-olds, your genetic predisposition, or what you inherited from your parents, would probably be much less relevant than the lifestyle choices and environmental exposures that you had. So for example, if this was a room full of 30-year-olds, one of my strongest admonitions would probably be don't smoke. Because the longer you are exposed to smoking and cigarettes, the greater the risk that is to your health. If you are a room full of 80 and 85-year-olds and you are smoking, it means that you have something constitutionally or genetically that has protected you from what we would normally think of as the ravages of cigarette smoking and the effects that they can have on your health. And while it doesn't mean that I wouldn't strongly recommend to you that you not smoke, I would have a much harder time making the argument to you that stopping smoking at that point was going to have much of an impact on your life, your lifestyle, or your quality of life. So as you get older, certainly as you approach the 80s and the 90s, what you have inherited genetically probably plays a much larger role in your overall health and your overall life expectancy. But what becomes important to me about that, and what I think would be important to you about that, is that while maybe your genetics will dictate how long you might live. How old were your parents when they died? What is your family history of diseases? Those kinds of things that might help you make some sort of best guess about how long you might live. I think there are some things that you can do that will affect the quality of those years. So while you may be genetically predisposed to live 85 years or 92 years, it doesn't necessarily mean those are going to be healthy years or good years. So there are things that you might be able to do that can affect that can improve your quality of life and can improve the way you feel when you get to 85 or 92. So that's the things I want to focus on a little bit today. And I'm not going to go into so much detail about things as I am to introduce you to a couple of newer things that I have begun to read about and see that I think have an impact on this. So I think we all know that exercise is a good thing to do. It's a difficult thing for most people to do. It's time-consuming. You sweat. Oftentimes people feel like they have to go somewhere to do exercise. Robert Butler, who was the original head of the National Institutes on Aging, once said that if exercise could be put into a pill, everyone would take it. Okay? But the problem is it can't. And so while the recommendation for exercise is 30 to 40 minutes of some type of aerobic activity, that can be walking, that can be running, that can be rowing, that can be swimming, 30 to 40 minutes 4 times a week. Clearly, the more you exercise, the better you may feel. But the two things that I want to comment on about exercise is, first of all, I think the most important thing is exercises that will improve your flexibility and your balance. So things like Tai Chi and stretching and those kinds of things, I think, are probably the best exercise when we talk about healthy aging. But one thing that's come, what keeps doing this? Okay. One thing that has come up recently that has been studied is the effect of cycling. And I'm not necessarily saying you get a bicycle and you ride around in the community, but even stationary cycling. There has been some very interesting studies that have been done that looked at muscle in people who cycled versus those who did not cycle, and comparing a group of 30-year-olds to a group of people over 65 years old. And they even went as far as to do muscle biopsies to look down at the cellular level of what the muscle tissue and the muscle cells looked like in these groups. And they had a group that did cycling, they had a group that did weightlifting, they had a group that did non-cycling, regular type of exercise. And what they turned up was the group that cycled had muscle tissue that looked like that of the muscles of the 30-year-olds. And that cycling seemed to be something that could cause, if you will, a youthful return to the muscles. So this is relatively new in the last year. It may be something that we can continue to look at and improve. But if you left today with one pearl about something you might want to think about doing to become young again or to age in a more healthy way, it would be to start a cycling program. And I would not recommend it be buying a bicycle and get out on the streets and cycle. But any kind of cycling machine or stationary bike that you feel safe on might make a lot of sense. The next thing is related to diet. Okay? There are so many diets now that it is hard to keep track of the number of them. And it's impossible for me to keep track, and it is impossible for me to even be able to make a recommendation to you about a specific diet other than the general consensus, which is more fruits and vegetables, okay? Less red meat, less processed food, less sugary drinks, okay? More fruits and vegetables. That's really considered to be what we don't do enough of from a diet perspective. But there are now ketogenic diets and anti-inflammatory diets and low-protein diets and high-protein diets. And I can assure you that if you get on the computer today and look up diet for healthy aging, you're going to find all kinds of things, okay? So it's very hard to be specific, but there is one thing I want to talk about related to a supplement, if you will, and that is curcumin. Some of you may be familiar with a substance called turmeric, which is a ginger type of spice that's native to India. Turmeric is used as a component of curry, and curcumin is a chemical that is a part of turmeric. And there have been some very exciting studies recently that have looked at the effect of curcumin on cognitive function. And I think most people, as they get older, probably begin to worry more about their cognitive function and their memory than virtually anything else. The likelihood of having some degree of cognitive dysfunction or memory loss increases as you get older, okay? So this is an area of considerable interest for people as they get older, and something they worry about that will threaten their ability to continue to live healthy and independently. And there's some very exciting information now that curcumin may indeed enhance cognitive function or minimize the risk of cognitive loss. And there are a number of products now that you can get at the health food store or at the pharmacy that are formulations of curcumin. So if you had some interest in wanting to take a supplement to your diet that you think might be of some help, I think there's probably sufficient evidence now to support the notion that some curcumin may be of benefit, okay? So the next thing I want to talk about is falling and preventing falls. One of the things that has become clear to me as I have been in practice longer and longer is the significant impact falls and injuries have on the opportunity to live a long, healthy life, particularly as you get into your late 80s and your 90s. So I think thinking about preventing falls may be one of the most important things that you can do as you get older. Most people want to remain independent, and they oftentimes don't want to think about these kinds of things. But falls and fractures can change life dramatically. And my guess is probably everybody in this room knows someone, has a friend who was living at home independently, taking care of themselves, doing great, and fell and broke their hip and never were able to get back home again. Now that doesn't mean that you can't fall and break your hip and do well. There may even be people in here who have done that and returned to their normal life. But the reality is the risks are increased exponentially when you fall. So I think it's extremely important as you sit and you think about the things that you can do as an individual to try to live a longer, healthy life is to prevent falls. So Look at your home and your environment and think about the things there that are at risk. Do you have a washing machine and a dryer that are down in your basement, and are you having to go up and down steps every day? That's a risk, okay? Do you have throw rugs around your house that you can get your toes caught on when you're walking through the house that you might fall? Are there objects in the way that you may not be able to see at nighttime when you get up to go to the bathroom that could cause you to fall, okay? Go through your medications with your physician and say, are there things here that might cause me to get dizzy or lightheaded that could increase my risk of falling when I get up during the daytime? Reducing your risk of falling is incredibly important. That does get back to the conversation we had a few minutes ago about exercise, and working on balance and working on flexibility are the kind of things that both can protect you from falling but can minimize the likelihood of injury if you do fall. So to emphasize again in my mind the importance of balance training, of balance fitness, and of stretching and flexibility as you age, I just can't say enough about the importance of that. The next thing I want to mention is staying active, okay? Stay involved in things. Try to stay intellectually stimulated. Keep up with current events, okay? Do word jumbles and word puzzles. Do crossword puzzles. Stay involved, stay busy, volunteer if you can. Okay? Remain a part of the activity and action that is around you. And that gets to the next issue of mine, which is maintaining social relationships. It's been hard for me to appreciate this as much as I should, because you oftentimes hear about the concept of aging in place. And a lot of times that concept of aging in place is the desire that people have to stay in their homes and live there until they die. And oftentimes that may mean alone and with nobody else around, all right? So I have felt very strongly that that's what people desired to do, but I have had numerous conversations with a guy that I have great respect for, who is considered one of the really premier marketing and public relations guys in the country in senior living communities. And I keep saying to him, I can't believe they keep building these places on every street corner. I said, people want to be at home. They want to age in place. They want to be where they are. And he says, you are absolutely wrong. He said, people don't, because they do not want to be isolated, okay? They want to be a part of a community like this, where there are activities and where they can maintain social interactions, and they can maintain relationships with family and friends. So I think there's little question that this is an area of extreme importance as you get older if you're looking to have a healthy life expectancy. The last thing I want to talk about, so maybe you're going to think, boy, you sure ended on kind of a downer note here, but the last thing I want to talk about is that I think that any conversation about healthy aging has to include a conversation about healthy dying. And what I mean by that is that I think everyone needs to play a role in what the end is going to look like. You need to take an active participation in where you feel like you want to be and under what circumstances do you feel like you want your death to occur. I have been impressed more and more about how valuable that is to my patients and their enjoyment of life when they are thinking about that and making decisions and having those conversations with their families and with their physicians. I'm reminded of a 93-year-old patient of mine who was absolutely wonderful. She would come to my office, incredibly well dressed, meticulous presentation. I would walk in the room. She would have all of her medications in order on the table. she would have pages and pages of blood pressure. She would take her blood pressure once or twice a day, every single day. And I would look at her blood pressures and I would say, your blood pressure's fine. You don't need to worry about your blood pressure. And she said, well, doctor, I don't want to die of a stroke. And so I thought to myself for a minute, and I sat back and I looked at her and I said, what do you want to die of? And she said, well, I don't want to die of cancer. And I said, well, okay. So you don't want to die of a stroke and you don't want to die of cancer. What do you want to die of? Okay? And the reality to me was she'd never really given it much thought. And while I admired that, it wasn't terribly realistic. And what I find is that when people at least give it some thought, enough to fill out advance directives and living wills, and talk to their families and their physicians about their feelings, about their death process, they feel better because that is a huge burden that is lifted. There is a sense of consolation that no matter what happens, things are going to be okay because they have made it clear to people how they felt. And the likelihood of them being able to accomplish at that point that which they want has allowed them to live more freely, more happily, and more healthfully. So I would encourage everyone, if you haven't, to make sure you've thought about advance directives and living wills, powers of attorney, so you will have the confidence to know that if you're not able to speak for yourself, you will have someone who is there, who understands what you want, and who can make decisions for you. So those are really the thoughts that I had today about sort of the current topic in 2018, my idea of healthy aging. It's always a pleasure to meet with you and speak to you. I know you're anxious to take the tours, to see this beautiful community, and then to put your money down. And we're anxious to have you do that, and I'm sure you'd like to get dessert out, but I am more than happy to stay for a little while and entertain questions, which I'm sure you have. So thank you for coming today. Thank you for looking at Bishop Spencer Place. I have been here since day one, maybe negative day one, and it's a wonderful community. It's not the only community, but it's a wonderful community, and we'd love to have any and all of you. So what questions do you have for me? Yes?
Glucosamine and chondroitin.
Yeah.
What do you favor that treating for joints?
Yeah, so the question was about a supplement called glucosamine and chondroitin, which is a joint supplement. It's something that people take to help with arthritic type of pains. The idea is it might help supplement the supportive tissue between the bones and provide a little additional cushioning to the joint. I think glucosamine with chondroitin is good. I think it's something that's reasonable to try. It's probably safer and better than some of the pain medications that we might give to people to help with arthritis that's advanced in their knees or their hips. I don't think it's something that's dangerous. I don't think there's good evidence that it is dangerous for you to take it. I do encourage everyone, if you're taking supplements, to talk to your physician about what those supplements are. Most of the time when I ask patients, are you taking anything? The only thing that they're thinking about is prescription medications. So they may be on a sack full of supplements that they get at the drugstore, but they don't think of those as being medications. But as we have been exposed more and more to supplements, we're realizing that they do have some potential adverse effects, particularly as it relates to taking other prescription medications. So always remember to talk to your healthcare providers about the supplements that you're taking. But I think glucosamine with chondroitin is probably okay. Yes?
Recommend which puts this type of information, perhaps in a more protracted form, for study and perhaps giving to other people?
Yeah, so the question was if I have a book that I could use as a reference, and that's a great question, and I don't Let me say this. There is a website that's the National Council on Aging, NCOA, and they've got great materials there that you can print off that basically cover some of this. The other thing that I think is good is there's a book called Living to 100, and it's a book that is a compilation of something that was called the New England Centenarian Study, and that was a longitudinal study that looked at families in which there were siblings that all lived to what we would consider the extremes of older age. So these were families of 7 or 8 siblings that all made it to their late 90s or early 100s. And they followed these people over years to try to determine what were the common themes about that group of people that might lead them to understand more about the things that led to a healthier aging, and also to try to dispel myths about getting older that really didn't seem to have anything in it. It's about a 230-page book, and it's fairly redundant as you read through the book, but it's not a bad one if you want to get some kind of sense. But I also think the website for the National Council on Aging can be really helpful. Thank you for that question. Yes?
Dr. Holt, tell us a word about hospice generally, and tell us how that might fit us and our family members specifically.
Yeah. Well, hospice is, for me, I talk to people about hospice from a philosophical perspective, and that is that there may come a time in your life when you have made the decision that you are no longer interested in active treatment of medical diseases or medical problems. And your preference may be to spend whatever time you have left in the comfort of the living setting that you have chosen, without a lot of medical interventions, without being taken to the hospital for periods of time, and simply be kept comfortable and allowed to live out the remainder of your life, however long that is. And philosophically, in my mind, that is hospice. That is a decision to participate in hospice. Hospice, from a practical perspective, is a group of people that will help take care of you either in your home, your chosen home. So whether that's a house or whether that's in a retirement community or in a nursing home or in a freestanding building called a hospice house, it's a group of people that will come and take care of you through what we call the dying process or in the terminal stages of your life. And their sole goal is to ensure that you are comfortable and ensure that your needs are being met in the way that you would like to have them met. I think that we probably, as a general rule on my side of the ledger, on the medical side of the ledger, probably underutilize hospice. Because remember, we're all basically trained to do something, and hospice for many doctors is perceived as doing nothing. Okay? So that's uncomfortable for some doctors to, if you will, acquiesce to that because they feel sometimes that's a failure on their part. So we're probably not as aggressive about talking to patients about hospice and getting patients on hospice as we should, but it's a great concept emotionally, and it's a great process from a practical basis. Any other questions? Yes?
Recently, it has been said that vitamins are really not helpful for you. I've been taking vitamins, glucosamine, chondroitin, these things for years. I really don't want to stop.
Yeah. Well, number one, so the question is about vitamins. Are they helpful? Are they not helpful? What do you take? How many do you take? How long do you take them? These are all difficult questions. If you came to me right now and said, I am on a multiple vitamin, And I need to know, should I continue to take this multiple vitamin? Or if you were not, and you came to me and you said, should I get on a multiple vitamin? The scientific evidence would say no. If you are eating a good, well-rounded diet, okay, you probably are not getting much benefit from a multiple vitamin because it is probably over and above what you need if you're eating a good, well-rounded diet. Vitamin C and vitamin E and vitamin D and vitamin A, these are all supplements that people frequently use and we sometimes talk about, and candidly, there is less evidence than there probably should be to support the use of many of those vitamins on an individual basis, but there are a lot of people who take those vitamins and feel better. And there is little, if any, risk in taking those vitamins. So my attitude on a personal level is, if you're taking them and they make you feel better, there is absolutely no reason to stop. There's no evidence that they're dangerous, and there's no evidence that you're doing yourself a disservice by continuing on them. So now, there are some things, obviously, if you have a deficiency of vitamin D, D as in dog, you should probably take vitamin D, okay? If you do not have a deficiency in vitamin D, there's probably not a lot of evidence that taking more of it when you already have enough is necessarily of benefit. So some of the decision about vitamin supplements is going to be dependent on what your own health situation is on an individual basis. But just in general, they're probably not dangerous. I think there are more questions about, do they really provide benefit than not. Yes?
Please tell us again the name of the study you cited concerning Viking.
Concerning what? Viking? What?
Cycling.
Oh, cycling. Oh, I tell you, I'm sorry. I will, you know what? If you will get her your name, I'll get you the reference. I don't have it. It was actually the New York Times. I can tell you that the New York Times, it was done through the Mayo Clinic up in Rochester, and the New York Times had a piece on it. You know how the national newspapers oftentimes will pick up medical information and they will reprint in their own way information and they'll refer to it. So if you go to the New York Times website and you just search under exercise and cycling or exercise, it will pull up this article, and it's been within the last 2 months for sure, and I think actually within the last month. So you'd be able to find their summary of it there and also the reference to it. But I will try to get that information so you can get it if you'll leave your information. Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have the reference. Yes?
What's your comment about fish oil?
Yeah, well, it's pretty tepid. You know, fish oil's been very popular for a long period of time, but probably more recently there has been less evidence to support fish oil just as a general supplement. Now again, there are people that have certain problems related, say most commonly to their heart or to their cholesterol, that fish oil may have a benefit. But just as a general rule, fish oil is probably falling more out of favor than it is falling into favor. So a little less favorable about that, yes.
What about CoQ10?
What about what?
CoQ10.
CoQ10, okay. CoQ10 is another supplement. There actually is some, now CoQ10, like many of these supplements, if you look up curcumin, say, what is curcumin good for? You're going to spend the rest of the afternoon reading all the potential benefits of curcumin, okay? And the same is true with CoQ10, but there has been some fairly good evidence that if you have heart disease, CoQ10 could be protective, okay? So maybe with heart disease, you could make the argument that CoQ10 is a reasonable thing to do. The other place where CoQ10 has been found to be a benefit is that A lot of people take these medications called statins, which I'm sure you're familiar with, to lower your cholesterol. One of the side effects of statins for many people is muscle aches and pains. That oftentimes is bad enough that it's a reason to stop the statin, but there are people who you don't really want to stop the statin on because of their risks of cardiovascular disease. And CoQ10 has been shown to modify or mitigate some of the muscle aches and pains that can be associated with taking statins. So there would be two reasons I could think of that are fairly well substantiated why CoQ10 as a supplement might be of some help. Yes?
What's your opinion on the new shingles shot?
Oh, yeah. So about probably 10 years ago, just very briefly, shingles or herpes zoster is a painful, uncomfortable disease that is a reactivation of the chickenpox virus. If you did not have the chickenpox virus, you will not get shingles. Okay? But if you have ever had the chickenpox virus, you are harboring in your body, back in your spinal cord, that virus that can, at some always inconvenient and unfortunate time, reactivate itself, and it is called shingles or herpes zoster. Okay? There is now about 10 years ago, they came out with a vaccine for that called Zostavax. It was a one-time shot, cost about $250. It was not a very effective vaccine, but it was the only one that we had. In the last year, a new shingles vaccine has come out called Shingrix, Shingrix. Shingrix is really a better vaccine. It's about 90+% effective, whereas the Zostavax was only about 50% effective. It's not a live virus, it's an inactivated virus, so some of the concerns with the Zostavax about if you get the vaccine and then interact with pregnant women or newborns, you don't have those concerns with the new ones. It is a two-part series that's divided by a couple of months. So you get the first one, you wait a couple of months, you get the second one. So if you have had the first shingles vaccine, as I have, it is still recommended that you get the new one. If you have not had any shingles vaccine, I would encourage and urge all of you to get the new one. Any of you who know people who have had shingles know that it's not much fun, and any of you that have had it would probably be more than happy to tell everybody it's not much fun. So good question and a good thing to get. Yes?
If you have shingles, can you get it again?
Yeah, used to be many years ago when I started in practice, it was thought that just having the disease created immunity from it, ever having it again, and we know that that's not true. So people who get shingles can have it again. And so they recommend that if a year has passed since your episode of shingles, if you've had shingles, at that point it's good to get the vaccine. So even if you've had shingles before, as long as a year has passed since you've had it, it's recommended that you get the vaccine. That just having had shingles is not going to protect you from having it again. Yes, sir?
What if you had the first vaccine?
Yeah.
2 years later you had the shingles, got over them. Do you recommend getting that second?
Yes.
Still do?
Yeah. Yeah. Still get it. Yes.
I wanted to know what your thoughts were on acupuncture?
Uh-huh.
Acupuncture, especially for Parkinson's.
Yeah, so the question was the role of acupuncture in the treatment of Parkinson's disease, and the answer to that is I don't know. You know, one of my many faults is that I was trained in a traditional medical school and traditional medical practice approach. And while oftentimes that approach has made people believe we are skeptics about other what we'll call holistic medicine approaches or alternative medicine approaches or naturopathic medicine approaches, I have been enlightened in my career to understanding that these clearly have a role in people's health. But I don't know the studies or the data about acupuncture in Parkinson's disease specifically. I'm sorry about that. What's that?
It did help his wife who had neuropathy.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? I thought, yes.
What is your role here at Bishop Spencer Place, and what's the connection with St. Louis if your doctors are all in another hospital?
All right, so my role here at Bishop Spencer Place today is to extract money from you people so you will move in here, okay? All right, has everybody got that? Do I need to say that again? No. All right, okay? I have been the medical director at Bishop Spencer Place since it opened. Bishop Spencer Place, as you know, has 3 levels of care. They have a nursing home or skilled nursing facility called York. They have an assisted living area called Coventry, and then independent living in Madison and Jefferson. Skilled nursing homes and nursing facilities are required to have a medical director, someone who agrees to take care of the patients who come in who don't have a doctor that will come here and see them, and most doctors will not go to nursing homes, okay? So I have been, since we opened, the medical director of the nursing home. As a result of that, I work in other parts of the facility, so I see patients in Coventry, and I see patients in Jefferson and in Madison. So in that regard, I see patients throughout the whole facility. So that's one thing I do. The second thing I do as the medical director is I have some administrative responsibilities to work with Steve and to work with Melissa and to work with the other folks here to ensure that we are meeting the regulations that we have as an assisted living facility and as a nursing home. So that's my role. As far as it relates to St. Luke's, I think as Steve said to you, St. Luke's became the owner of Bishop Spencer Place was 6 months ago, so sometime in the last year. It's interesting because, as most of you probably know, over the 22 years we've been here, people thought we were part of St. Luke's because of both the Episcopalian relationship and the proximity geographically. And St. Luke's has been a friend of ours, and we have been a friend of St. Luke's for all those years, and it is just natural. But in the last year, St. Luke's actually took ownership of Bishop Spencer Place. In fact, I've even seen some things recently. Yeah, it's even on this. We're now calling it St. Luke's Bishop Spencer Place. In terms of my role at St. Luke's, I have a private practice in internal medicine and geriatrics. I am not employed by the hospital. Most doctors now on the Plaza campus, most, not all, but probably 70% are employed by St. Luke's Hospital. I still have what we're calling an independent, we used to say, are you an employed or an unemployed doctor? And we decided we don't really like, those terms aren't very good. So we are independent. You're either employed or independent. So I am still independent, but I do have an administrative role with the hospital because I spend some time as the vice president for medical affairs, or what some other people would refer to as the chief medical officer. So I have tight affiliations at both places, and now those places are one and the same. Yes? Oh boy, now there's an even tougher question. Oddly enough, the question was, is the new shingles shot covered by Medicare? It's hard to follow from day to day what Medicare is going to cover and what they're not going to cover, and under what circumstances they're going to cover that. So what I'm advising my patients to do, we do not give the shingles vaccine at my office, or I would know the answer to this, because it would be incredibly important to me about whether we were going to get paid by Medicare to give it. We don't keep it at our office because A, it's expensive, B, we don't give enough of them, and it doesn't last for very long, so we We originally started that, but we were throwing a bunch of it away, and we just said no. So most of the pharmacies now, as you know, give all kinds of vaccinations. The flu shot, the pneumonia shot, the hepatitis shot, and the shingles shot. So what I'm telling all of my patients to do is to talk to the pharmacy that they're going to before they get the shot and ask if Medicare covers it. So 2 things I would add on the Shingrix is ask about coverage, whether you have Medicare or private insurance, and know what their history and experience has been, because they will know, because they're submitting those bills. They are not giving these free, I guarantee you. Okay? And the second thing is make sure they've got it, because I have heard in the last month from several sources that the new shingles vaccine is in short supply. So people are going to pharmacies to get it, and they're not having it. And I just had a comment here that 2 months is what you heard.
2 months, and I'm on a waiting list.
We got a waiting list in 2 months. So anyway, a couple more questions. Yeah.
My wife had Alzheimer's,
Uh-huh.
and I'm concerned about my children.
Uh-huh.
What's the probability of my daughter's son?
Yeah.
Her sister had too.
Yeah. So the question was about, in effect, what's the likelihood of, in someone who has Alzheimer's disease, what is the likelihood that the children will get Alzheimer's disease? And there is clearly a familial predisposition. So there is a higher likelihood of the children of somebody with Alzheimer's disease getting Alzheimer's disease than just the general population. But it's probably relatively small. I mean, it's probably on the order of 10 or 20% increase in risk. There is some new stuff going on, and I know you guys may have even had a presentation about this, and there's certainly more public interest and knowledge about genetic testing. Shoot, you can even, I think, go down to the drugstore now and get the 23andMe, or go to Ancestry.com and get a little swab and swab the inside of your mouth and put it in a package and send it off somewhere, and they will send you back information that tells you everything about you that probably you really don't want to know. But so I think we're going to probably evolve around to where we will have a better ability to know for sure through genetic testing. So we're not there yet, but so there is a slightly higher risk that the children of somebody with Alzheimer's disease would get Alzheimer's disease. It's not 50%, it's not 80%, it's smaller, but there is a slightly increased risk. Okay, one more. Or not. Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about gout?
Gout. Okay, the question was, can we talk a little bit more about gout? Why would we want to? It's painful. It hurts my big toe just thinking about it. Okay, so gout is an acute, what we call an acute monoarticular arthritis. It is an acute inflammatory disease that usually occurs in a single joint. It usually occurs in the big toe because it tends to be in joints that are far away in the body. So the big toe, the ankle, a finger. Gout is the precipitation of uric acid crystals in the body. So these crystals of uric acid precipitate out of the blood and deposit in the joint, okay? Now, uric acid is formed from urate, and urate is something that comes from proteins that you eat. So people that eat really high protein diets are at increased risk of getting gout. Usually the urate is processed and filtered through the kidneys. So sometimes the people that have kidney problems and they don't get rid of the uric acid and the urate as well can get higher levels of uric acid in their bloodstream, and that can increase their risk of gout. There are treatments both for the acute phase of gout, which is you wake up in the morning, your big toe is red and painful and hot, and you can't get a shoe on and you don't want to get up and walk. That's really the acute phase of gout, and there are medications to make that go away. And then if your uric acid level is elevated, there are medications to take on a long period of time to keep the uric acid level down so you're not likely to get gout. And then, of course, there are dietary things that you can do, like low-protein diets, to try to minimize the risk of getting gout. And I hope that the conversation about gout does not elicit an attack in anybody this afternoon, because it's not much fun. But that's what gout is. Hey, thanks. It's a lot of fun to be with you guys today. Get the checkbooks out. Show me the money, as they say. And we've got places you'd love to move into here. Thank you. Have a good day.